You have been disrespected today. Not necessarily with words. Maybe it was the meeting where someone talked over you and nobody flinched. The joke at your expense that landed and you let it land. The boundary you drew last month that got tested this week and you said nothing. And the worst part is not what they did. It is what you did after. You stayed. You recalibrated. You found a reason why this time was different, why this situation was an exception, why bringing it up would cause more damage than absorbing it. You have been running that calculation for years, and every time the answer comes back the same: stay quiet, stay small, stay. Here is what Machiavelli understood that you were never taught. Men do not lose respect because others are cruel. They lose it because they make cruelty cheap. No cost, no consequence, no friction. When disrespecting you costs nothing, people do it casually, reflexively, without even registering it as a choice. You have trained them to move through you like air moves through an open window. That ends today, not with a speech, not with a confrontation, with 6 laws that change the underlying math of every interaction you are in. These are not techniques, they are architecture. And once you build it, nobody gets to take it apart. 1. Respect is not something you earn. It is something you demand. You have been told the wrong thing your entire life. Respect is earned. Work hard enough, perform well enough, be good enough, and eventually the people around you will give you what you deserve. That is the story. You believed it. You operated inside it for years. Machiavelli watched princes believe the same story. He watched them get destroyed by it. In The Prince, he was precise about this. A ruler who relies on the goodwill of others builds on sand. The moment the conditions change, the goodwill evaporates. What looked like respect was always just convenience. The moment your usefulness shifted, the respect shifted with it. Respect is not a reward distributed to the deserving. It is a boundary enforced by the unwilling to tolerate its absence. It is a boundary. Boundaries are not felt. They are not communicated. They are demonstrated through what you will and will not remain in contact with. The people in your life who command the most respect are not the most talented people in the room. They are the ones who have made it structurally impossible to disrespect them without paying a price. You know exactly who this person is. Think of them right now. They do not announce their standards. They do not explain their limits. But at some point, everyone around them learned, through direct experience, that dismissing them has a consequence. Nobody sat down and mapped that out. It was demonstrated, quietly, repeatedly. The price became known. You have been doing the opposite. Every time you absorbed the disrespect without consequence, you lowered the price to 0. And when something costs nothing, people take as much as they want, not because they are monsters, because you wrote the policy and the policy said, free, stop asking for respect, start making it expensive to withhold. That is law 1. That is where everything else begins. 2. Stop keeping people who cost you more than they give. You are measuring people by the wrong unit. You measure them by their words, their intentions, their history with you, how charming they are when they need something. You hold the balance sheet in your head and you count the good against the bad, and you decide the ratio is still acceptable. Machiavelli measured people by what they cost him, not whether they were loyal in their hearts, not whether they meant well, whether the price of keeping them in his orbit was higher than the value they returned. And that price was never purely financial. The most expensive cost was strategic. Who did he become when they were present? What did he permit himself in their company that he would not permit anywhere else? Ask yourself one question only, and answer it honestly. Do you like who you are when you are around this person? Not whether they make you feel good in the moment, not whether they say the right things when the situation demands it. Who do you become over time? Are you more careful with your words? Do you leave every interaction feeling like something was taken and nothing was returned? Do you make smaller decisions, hold smaller opinions, occupy smaller space? That contraction is the cost, and you have been paying it on a subscription you forgot you signed. Machiavelli was ruthless about his alliances, not out of coldness, out of clarity. He understood that every alliance is an exchange. If the exchange is consistently tilted against you, the alliance is not an alliance, it is a drain wearing a familiar face. The man who tolerates everything controls nothing. Because when you accept every cost without exit, you signal that your threshold for pain is infinite, and people, without necessarily being conscious of the decision, will push to the edge of what you accept. Not because they planned it, because you showed them the edge and then moved it every time they reached it. You cannot negotiate with someone who has learned that every negotiation ends in your surrender. Picture a room, a man sitting across from someone who has just said something that crossed a line. The old version of him explains why it was not acceptable. The other person nods. 2 weeks later, the line gets crossed again, slightly further out. He explains again. The line moves again. Now picture the same room, same moment. But this man says nothing. He closes his notebook. He stands up. He leaves. No explanation, no announcement, just absence. The other person sits in that room, and for the first time the math changes. The cost of that behavior just became visible. It was not a conversation that changed the equation. It was the door closing. You do not fix this with words. You fix it by changing what you will remain present for. 3. You taught them how to treat you. The people who disrespect you are not the problem. They are following instructions. Instructions you wrote. You wrote them with every silence that followed a violation, every acceptance without consequence. Every morning you woke up inside a situation that diminished you and decided that today was not the day to change it. Machiavelli understood this at the level of states. In the discourses on Livy, he observed that a republic which cannot defend its borders teaches its enemies that invasion is safe, not because the enemies are uniquely evil, because the republic demonstrated, through consistent inaction, that crossing the line carries no cost. The same principle operates in every room you walk into. What you permit, you promote. What you absorb without consequence, you authorize. And every person in your life has been running a quiet experiment on where your actual limits are, not where you say they are. The results of that experiment are the relationship you currently have with them. Here is what rebuilding the instruction manual requires. Not a conversation, not an announcement. 3 behaviors applied without commentary. First, keep the promises you make to yourself. This is the foundation, not the promises you make to others. Those matter too, but the ones you make alone, in the quiet, where no one is watching. Every time you set a standard for yourself and abandon it when it becomes inconvenient, you teach your nervous system that your word means nothing. And a man whose internal word means nothing will accept external treatment that mirrors that belief. It is not a coincidence. It is alignment. Second, exit environments that make you smaller, not with a speech, not with an explanation nobody asked for. Picture the man who realizes, sitting at a table he has sat at 100 times, that he has never once stood up from that table feeling like himself. He does not convene a meeting about it. He stops going. The absence is the message. The people at that table will feel the shift without being told what it means. That uncertainty is the point. Third, choose the discomfort of the exit over the corrosion of the stay. Most men will accept almost any amount of internal damage to avoid external awkwardness. The moment you should have said no and didn't. The door you should have walked through and didn't. That swallowing is not patience. It compounds. Every betrayal of yourself makes the next one easier, until one day you look at the version of yourself you have become, and you recognize the author of the instruction manual. It was you. Every page of it, rewrite it through behavior, not through declaration. The new instructions are written the same way the old ones were, one decision at a time, in the moments nobody is watching. 4. Talking about it never works. This does. You have had the conversation. More than once, you sat across from the person who crossed the line and you explained, calmly and with specific detail, exactly what happened and why it could not happen again. They nodded. They apologized. They looked remorseful in a way that felt genuine. You believed it because you needed to believe it. And then it happened again. Machiavelli was direct about why. In The Prince, he wrote that men will not change their behavior unless the cost of the old behavior becomes greater than the cost of the new one. Words do not create cost. They create the temporary appearance of cost. The apology is not a consequence. It is a transaction that clears the debt without changing the underlying behavior. Real cost is structural. Real cost is a consequence that exists independent of how the other person feels about it. The moment you say, "Do not do this again," without attaching a visible consequence, you have taught them one precise thing. Doing it again is acceptable. The words were performance. You proved it by staying in exactly the same position afterward. Picture a meeting room, 6 people around a table. An employee makes a joke at his manager's expense. The room laughs. The manager's face stays still. He closes his folder. He stands up. He walks out. No explanation. The door closes. That room goes silent. Nobody in that room has ever seen that before. They expected a reprimand, a tense moment, maybe a sharp word. What they got was absence. And absence, in that context, carries a weight that no reprimand could match. Because absence says, the cost of that behavior was my presence. And now you know what my presence is worth. The manager does not need to return and explain. The lesson has already been delivered. This is not about being dramatic. It is not about walking out of rooms for effect. It is about having a decision made in advance, in cold blood, not in the heat of the moment, about what you will and will not remain in contact with, and then executing that decision without hesitation and without commentary when the moment arrives. No speeches, no emotional accounting of every grievance, just the action. Clean, final. One consistent consequence is worth 10,000 conversations, because the consequence does not require their agreement. It does not require them to admit wrongdoing. It does not require a negotiation about whether the line was actually crossed. It simply changes the math. And when the math changes, behavior changes. Not because they became good people, because the old behavior became expensive. Build the architecture. Stop writing the speeches. If you recognize this pattern in your own life, the cycle of conversation without consequence, drop a number in the comments right now. One number. How many times you have had the same conversation with the same person about the same behavior? Just a number. No explanation needed. The number itself says everything. 5. They always test you first. Most men fail without knowing it. Nobody violates your limits without warning. This is the part you missed. You thought the disrespect came suddenly. You thought one day everything was fine, and the next day you were being treated with contempt. That is not what happened. What happened was a test, and then another, and then another, each one slightly further than the last. You passed none of them. Machiavelli observed this at the level of statecraft. Before any general moves his army across a border, he sends scouts, small incursions, low-cost probes to measure the response. If the defense holds, the incursion retreats. If the defense does not hold, the incursion expands. This is not malice. This is strategy, and it operates in every human relationship, whether the person doing it knows it or not. The test looks like this. A comment lands that is slightly beyond what is comfortable, not egregiously offensive, just slightly over the line. The person who said it watches. Not obviously. They watch to see what happens in the next 3 seconds. If you smile, if you deflect, if you laugh it off, if you say nothing, the scout reports back, border undefended, move the line. A week later, the comment is harder, the joke is sharper. The dismissal is more visible. Each escalation is calibrated to the previous response. They are not doing this consciously in most cases. It is social behavior operating below awareness. But the mechanism is precise. You think the explosion came out of nowhere. It did not. The explosion was the final test passing, the one where they learned the line does not exist. Here is how you stop the escalation before it reaches that point. Respond to the first test. Not with drama, not with a speech, with the smallest visible response that makes the cost legible. Sometimes it is silence where there was previously laughter. Sometimes it is a look that does not shift to accommodation. Sometimes it is leaving 30 minutes early from something you would previously have endured for hours. The response does not need to be large, it needs to be clear. Because the purpose of the test is to gather information. Your job is to make sure the information they gather is accurate. The border is here, it is real. Crossing it has a cost. When that information is received clearly on the first test, the second test rarely comes. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But he was more specific than that quote suggests. What he was describing was not fear of violence, it was fear of consequence. A ruler who demonstrates early and clearly that violations carry cost rarely has to demonstrate it again. The reputation does the work. The known price of the behavior is enough. Build the reputation through early, consistent, proportionate response, not through anger, through clarity. The test is always the beginning. Your response to the first test writes the rest of the story. 6. A man who knows his value never has to prove it. The most powerful thing you will ever do in a conflict is refuse to have it. Not out of fear, not because you do not have the words, because you have already made a decision that the argument cannot change. The man who knows his worth does not argue for it because his worth is not subject to negotiation. It was settled before the conversation started. In his own body, in the quality of his attention, in the way he decides, before he walks into any room, what he will and will not accept inside it. Machiavelli's ideal prince did not seek validation from the court. He understood at a structural level that the moment your self-assessment depends on external verdict, the court owns you. You have handed the most important lever of your behavior to the people least qualified to hold it. The Stoic tradition understood the same thing from a different angle. Epictetus, writing from a position of literal slavery, drew the line precisely. What is in your power is your judgment, your values, your response. Everything outside that, the opinions of others, their approval, their recognition, is outside your power. Build your foundation there, and you are building on water. Every shift in the current takes the foundation with it. Most men do not argue for their worth because they are confident. They argue because they are not sure. The argument is the signal. When someone challenges you and you feel the pull to present your case, to produce evidence of your value, to make them understand, stop. That pull is information. It is telling you that some part of you is waiting for them to confirm what you could not confirm on your own. That is the work, not the rebuttal. The internal architecture. Picture two men receiving the same insult. The first man defends himself. He explains, he provides context. He makes his case with energy and precision. The room watches a man who needed to respond. The second man looks at the person who spoke. He holds the silence for 3 seconds. Then he does something else entirely, continues the conversation, closes his notebook, asks a question, changes the subject. The room watches a man who did not need to respond. The second man is not colder or more detached. He is more certain. And certainty, in a room full of people who are performing their confidence, is the rarest thing in the space. High-respect men do not argue to be respected. They simply stop being present in places where respect is withheld. Not with anger, not with announcement, with the quiet finality of a man who made a decision before the situation arose, and is now simply executing it. He does not need them to understand. He does not need them to agree. He does not need the validation of a witness. He already knows, and the people who watched him leave, who had prepared their arguments, who were ready for the fight, they are standing in a room holding weapons against a man who already walked out the door. That is the end of the instruction manual they will write about you from this point forward. Not a description of your tolerance, a description of your threshold. 6 laws. 1 structure. Remove any single piece and the whole thing weakens. Silence without consequence is endurance. Consequence without early response lets the testing go unchecked. Internal worth without external demonstration stays invisible. All 6, running together, build something that cannot be faked and cannot be manufactured through technique. They build presence, not the performed presence of the man who is trying to seem powerful, the settled presence of the man who has decided in advance what he is worth, what he will accept, and what he will do when the line is crossed. That presence does not announce itself. It does not need to. Rooms feel it before the man has said a word. Machiavelli spent years in exile, stripped of his position, tortured, cast out of the Florence he had spent his life serving. He did not collapse into the injustice of it. He sat down and wrote the most precise analysis of power ever produced. He did not need the court to recognize his worth. He knew it. He demonstrated it through the work. Your discipline is the demonstration. Your exits are the policy. Your silence after the line is crossed is the consequence that no speech could match. The world is running a continuous test on every person in it. It is always probing, always measuring the response, looking for the soft place, the negotiable standard, the border that moves when pressure is applied. You now know what to do with the test. Most men who watch this will recognize themselves in every law. They will feel the precision of it, and then they will go back to the same rooms, the same relationships, the same slow corrosion of accepting less than they wrote down as their standard, because execution requires cost, and most men in the actual moment decide the cost is too high. You are still here. That is data. If this hits something real, subscribe, not because I asked, because you are done being the person the room runs its tests on. The next video goes deeper into the specific mechanics of how power operates in the spaces around you. It is already waiting. The old instruction manual is finished. Go write the new one.